Today we're going to check out setting up auto bed leveling on the Lotmaxx SC-10 Shark. Hello everyone, Chris here, and usually in the basement we do one full-length video per week. They're usually released on Wednesday mornings, at least in my time zone, but as you can imagine, I have a lot of smaller projects that I'd like to get done and make videos on. But they're usually always focused on something that's very specific to a certain printer, or just a quick tip that might help you out. So we're going to start doing a few bonus videos here and there. Like for this one. This is the Lotmaxx SC-10 Shark, and you can buy a couple of different add-ons for this printer, but those might not make it into a long video. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to check out the auto bed leveling add-on for this printer. It should be pretty straightforward. They have the plug right in front that you can use to plug it in. When you buy the add-on, they give you the sensors and the wires, and it should already be baked into the firmware. So let's just dig into it and see how it goes. So if you haven't seen it before, this is what the SC-10 Shark looks like. It is now fully funded over on Kickstarter, and they are shipping printers. And you can get a few different options when you're ordering it. Even bed leveling, I believe it is only $20 to add on the sensor. So when you order that sensor add-on, you will get the wires that are already terminated. These are long enough to get up to that Hotend carriage. A couple of screws to fix that bracket, and then the sensor on a bracket. Note this is a 3D touch sensor, not a BL touch. But it comes on a molded bracket that goes right on the Hotend carriage. I am going to go ahead and plug this side of the cable into the sensor because it might be a little trickier when the sensor is affixed to the Hotend carriage. Our sensor wires are on. Let's go ahead and put it on the printer. So I did move my Hotend carriage all the way to the top as far as it would go, and to the right, just to see if there was enough clearance and enough wire length to install it, and the wire that they gave me was more than long enough, so we're good there. But something to note, your sensor bracket is going to go on just like this, and your X carriage will not have as much room as it did before. I think you're still fine, you're still going to be within the bed surface, but your maximum will actually allow this sensor to run into this bracket. Just something to be aware of, you'll probably need about 20 millimeters more clearance when this bracket is on. So we're just going to use two M3 screws to put the sensor in these two pre-threaded holes right here. You've got your top and bottom one, those are in, and it feels pretty secure. Now I'm going to run my wires just on the outside of this loom. It would probably be better if you took off these zip ties and actually ran it inside this sleeving, but just to test it for now and make sure it works, I'm just going to zip tie it to the outside of this bundle following my PTFE tube. So again, I just kind of have it zip tied to the existing loom here. I have the Hotend positioned far enough that I make sure I have enough length, but I just bring it down through here and zip tie it to the existing wire loom and bring it all the way down to the base extrusion. So here's a bit of the tricky part. I would suggest you either run it in the extrusion on the outside or the top, but you're going to need some sort of cover or clip. There's a lot of things you can 3D print to fix this, including whole cover guides. I use those quite often. That would probably be the best fix because there's really nothing to zip tie this down to. So you might have to get creative to solve your wire management. But the end of this plug actually runs to the front of the printer. And there's a spot right here labeled Auto Bed Leveling. It'll plug in with the clip down. Just like so. So the hardware portion of this install is done. Now let's check out the firmware and see how easy it's going to be to use. If the sensor is wired and cabled correctly, when we power on, it should do a self-test of that sensor. And it does, so that's a great sign. So the hardware was pretty straightforward. We just mounted the sensor and plugged it in. We do need a little bit of help with our wire management, but again, we can probably print something out to make that look a lot better. Now we will need a few tweaks in the firmware. And the firmware isn't quite readily available yet, but I'm sure as people start getting their printers into their hands, Lotmaxx will make that firmware available to everybody. But for now, you can contact them and get a copy. So now I'm going to show you how to tweak that firmware to start using ABL. So when you get your firmware from Lotmaxx, you'll get a zip file that looks a lot like this. SC-10 Shark, they are on version .219. So we're just going to extract all, and we'll need to make updates to this configuration file. I recommend you use Notepad++, but whatever your favorite text editor is. And down here at the bottom, level mode, we're just going to change that from 0 to 1. That should be the only change we have to make, but we do have to reflash. So we'll save this, and I've mounted my SD card from my printer onto my computer, and we're going to copy everything that's in that firmware zip file, except for the instructions on firmware upgrade. So these 4 items, we'll right-click copy, and we'll paste on our SD card. It should be ready to mount back on the printer. When the update starts, you'll see a few things across the top. It's being updated. It only takes a couple of minutes to complete. When it's complete, you'll see the Shark logo. And back to your printing icons, if you go into Control, you now have auto leveling instead of just leveling right over here. If you hit auto leveling, you can see you have your Z offset currently set at 210. We can adjust that if we need a little more squish on our layer. That's what the plus and minus are for. You're going to go a tenth at a time. You can also go at 5/100ths. And then we can just hit this key to start an auto leveling sequence. And before we start our auto bed level, I am going to go ahead and preheat the bed. I'm doing mostly PLA, so I'm just going to set it to 50C for now. We're up to temp, we went home, now we're going to start our sequence. We'll still use the Z in-stop switch to home Z, but now we'll go through the bed leveling sequence. 3 points across the front. And before it gets done with this sequence, I'm actually going to slide a piece of paper underneath the nozzle, so that in case it's too close, it doesn't gouge it. You'll see more why in just a second. 3 points in the middle, and 3 points in the back. Slide a piece of paper under, and that nozzle is definitely too close. So we need to adjust our offset. And I do this now because we don't have adjustments on the fly quite yet. I'm sure that will be an update because you really need that nowadays, some live Z adjust or baby stepping. But you can't do it during a print. So on the auto leveling screen, I'm just going to make the offset a little smaller. We're currently at 210. My offset looks a lot better at 120. You want it just touching that paper. So we should be good. And just a fun fact, if you open up Pronterface while it's doing its auto leveling, you can see those values in the terminal. So now we have the firmware tweaked, bed leveling seems to be working just fine. We might need to make a Z adjustment on our first print, but you can do that right from the screen. But we do need to get into the slicer and add the commands so that bed leveling runs before each print. So let's do that. And before we fix up the slicer, I do recommend that you remount your SD card one more time. We're going to put some new G-code on it anyway, but you can see that all the configuration files have been marked with old. But no matter how they're renamed, it seems to still want to flash them every time you boot the printer. I'm sure this is just a bug and they will work this out, but for now I recommend you just delete everything on the card. In fact, since we don't want anything on it, I'm just going to right click and hit format. We'll do quick format. That way I'm sure the card is empty, there's no firmware on it that tries to flash on boot. Just a quick tip if you're seeing that. And now that I just told you to format everything on your SD card, I did assume that you had made a backup of everything that was on there before like I did, so please do that. It does have the user guide and everything you need to know about the printer and a few test files. The user guide actually comes in handy, especially when setting up things like this. It gives you the correct G-code commands to use. So just keep that in mind. But we'll open up the Lotmaxx flavor of Cura that they provide. They do have all the profiles, which most of them are very good. I'm pretty impressed with those. So we'll go to Settings, we'll go to Printer, make sure we're on SC-10 Shark, Manage Printers, and then I'm going to hit Manage Settings. And all you have to do to get it to auto level right after it homes for each print is just put an L right after G28. That way it's going to run that sequence, you shouldn't have to worry about it. Now on a lot of slicers, they're not going to heat up the bed in the hot end before the print starts, so the start G-code is going to be just a little bit different, but Cura handles all that. So we should be good here. We can close, we'll grab our file, we'll slice it, we'll save it to our SD card, and start printing. SD card's back in, we'll go to print, find our file, and print. We'll wait for the bed and the hot end to heat up. So we went home and our leveling sequence started. We'll head over, start our prime line, and now we'll start our print. Let's stop it. I know it's kind of hard to see with that silver filament on that gray background, but our first layer looks pretty good. So there it is, your auto bed leveling setup on your Lotmaxx SC-10 Shark. Now it is kind of a bummer they don't have baby stepping or a first layer calibration. I hope that's a feature that comes to the firmware very soon. You can get around it, but it is kind of a pain. And I know this is a pretty specific printer with a very specific setup, but as the Shark becomes more popular and gets into users' hands, hopefully this will be helpful when you're setting up your ABL. And that's it for today, and I will see you very soon on the next one.